Amen. As we continue our study through the book of Revelation, chapter 6 is where we found ourselves last week in the first 8 verses of chapter 6 in Revelation. They match up with the first 8 verses of Matthew's Gospel, chapter 24, as we just read. And there are, in these first 8 verses of Revelation 6, there's an imagery and an action scene that takes place as the seals are opened, okay, as the scroll which contains the details of how God will take back the earth and all the universe that was his to begin with, that Satan mistakenly thinks he now owns and will possess, or as he is attempting to overthrow God, God will take it back and bring everything back into subjection that has lived in rebellion and opposition to God for so many years. And so, as we read in chapter 5 of Revelation, there's only one who is worthy of starting this process, because he can not only start it, he can finish it. He can start the process because he is the Lamb who was slain, but he's not the Lamb who is dead and gone, but he is the Lamb who died but rose again. He is Jesus Christ, the triumphant victor over sin, death, hell, and the grave. Make no mistake about it, Jesus is the one who is capable of opening these seals and then carrying out the actions that God has designed, whereby he will exact the punishment, he will deliver the justice that the world has been screaming for forever. Now, of course, justice is always sort of a relative thing. We want justice done to the people who have done something to us. We want justice unless we're the ones who need to receive punishment for justice. Amen? That's sort of a natural human condition, is that we always want somebody else's misdeeds to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, and we want some forgiveness and grace and understanding when we're the ones at fault. But make no mistake about it, again, Jesus Christ has come to settle all that. It has already been determined how it will be settled, and by the grace of God, he has chosen to see fit to preserve for us a record of how that will take place, with enough detail that we don't have to question or wonder, well, is he really going to do it? No, there's enough detail and definition laid out in these chapters in the book of Revelation, beginning with chapter 6 and especially through chapter 19, the devastation and the punishment that the dwellers of the earth who have rejected Jesus Christ, the punishment they deserve, they will receive. The earth and all its inhabitants and the system of earth and the world. You know how we talk about how we are supposed to operate in the world but not be of the world? Okay, this world system that is always focused on mankind. There's always this belief that mankind can do it themselves, that we can be the center of the universe. And that's always been the issue at hand. The rebellion has always been based on believing that we were more important than anything or anyone else. Satan, the fallen angel, believed that he deserved the praise and the adoration that was being given to God all the time. And Satan has inflicted the sin or the disease of sin in all of humanity from the Garden of Eden. And that sin always starts with the question, is God really all the things he says he is? And do you and I have to really submit ourselves to God? Because Satan began with the question and the wondering, well, you know that the reason he won't want you to eat from that one tree is because you'll be as smart as him if you do. And so he's holding out on you, and you don't have any need for him if you are smart enough on your own. And that's sort of the mental math that takes place, whether anybody ever thought of that, and whether anybody actually puts that into words or not, but that is the mental math or the mental gymnastics we go through when we say, I will be in charge of my life. and I will not put myself underneath God. Well, that's what Satan has always promoted, and he has always suggested. He has tempted each and every human with that, and we are infected with that disease of sin that is rebellious toward God. But the finished work at the cross of Calvary of Jesus Christ some 2,000 years ago, the blood that was shed there is the blood that is the forgiveness of all sin of all time for all mankind. And your total faith and trust in what Jesus did on the cross at Calvary is how you put yourself in position to receive the salvation that is granted by God by grace through the faith that you exhibit in Jesus Christ, the capacity to trust in Jesus Christ and accept the gift of salvation and forgiveness that comes from Him. When that is your story, when you are a follower of Jesus on the basis of not what you have done, not what kind of person you've been, not all the good things that you can count on and point to on your resume, but when you have chosen to receive your justification, you have chosen to be made right with God on the basis of what Jesus did, and your willingness to trust that and submit to that, then God has promised to take care of those who are in that situation. We have numerous passages in the Bible that tell us and remind us that God has not appointed His children unto wrath, but that the wrath of God, everything God hates about my sin, Jesus took that at Calvary. And God will not punish me for it because He already punished Jesus for it. Therefore, my life ought to be easily and convincingly submitted to Jesus Christ, since He took the punishment and the wrath of God for my sin. But for those who do not operate underneath the forgiveness and the salvation of Jesus Christ, those who are living independently, they will receive the full wrath and the full fury of God's hatred towards sin. And it is promised to happen. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are simply the beginning. They are simply the beginning. They are the opening act, if you will. And we looked last week at a brief overview of these four horsemen that are described in the first 8 verses of Revelation 6. We spent most of our time discussing the first 2 verses, which indicate a rider on a white horse will bring world peace, or at least a false version of peace and safety. The world that cries out to be protected and to feel safe and to have some level of security and to feel like there's a lack of conflict whereby they can enjoy their best life now. This world will cry out for that at a continual pace, and God will grant it to them, but it will be a deceptive peace that will not last. Because the second horseman will bring worldwide war. The third horseman will bring the famine that is not hard to imagine as the follow-up to a world that is at war. And then the fourth horseman will bring natural deadly disasters of all kinds, whether it be diseases or whether it be actual earthquakes, floods, you name it, it's possible. Let's take a closer look at all of this. Revelation chapter 6 and verse 1, and I will parallel it with the passages from Matthew chapter 24. We won't spend much time here on the first 2 because we discussed them last week. But the beginning of all of this, Revelation 6:1, as I watched, the Lamb broke the first of the 7 seals on the scroll. Then I heard one of the 4 living beings say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And in verse 2 it says, I looked up and saw a white horse standing there. Its rider carried a bow, and a crown was placed on his head. He rode out to win many battles and to gain the victory. He will be an impressive conqueror, but he won't do it through war. He will be a man of great peace, or at least there will be a presence of peace. And when I say he, eventually the Antichrist will be the one. There will be one who rises from a group of many as Jesus promised us, there will be one that will rise above all the rest, that will be the most noteworthy and the most significant, impressive leader who brings this supposed world peace. He'll be the one that people look to. He'll be the one that they are convinced has brought peace and safety to a world of great chaos. Now, on the timeline, we have every reason to believe that since God has promised to protect and to save, deliver His people from the wrath, not through the wrath, but protect them and save them from the wrath, there's every reason to believe that the true believers have already been raptured home at the time that this would begin. There's every reason to believe that, because those that are of the church, the true believers, are not mentioned again until 15 chapters later, basically. So there's every reason to believe that the members of the members of society, the ones who are on this earth, will recognize that there is a calmness that suddenly overtakes this crazy world. And there'll be a group of individuals who will seemingly step to the forefront, and this bow that they carry will indicate that they can win wars without having to fire arrows. They will be peaceful providers to the world. They will not have to conquer the world through war. They will conquer the world through peace and kindness and a promise of safety and health and wealth and well, they will certainly, as we'll take a look at in later passages, they will provide a government structure, a religious structure, a financial structure that is global in its scope, and everybody will be convinced that they are being well taken care of, and they will believe in this great false peace. Matthew 24, verses 4 and 5, Jesus says, "Don't be misled. Don't let anyone mislead you, for many will come in my name." There will be many people that will step to the forefront that will essentially be like a Messiah. There will be the people will, in essence, worship them the same way that they might a Messiah. They will hang on every word that these leaders provide for them, and they will be convinced that we are now experiencing the great reset of the earth, a great renewal, and this one world everything will provide them with this calming effect. And it won't dawn on them that God has done something amazing or incredible, or that God is in control. No, they will believe that mankind has finally figured it out. Now, all these Christians are suddenly gone. We'll just consider all that a blessing, perhaps they'll say. Now we don't have to fight over what the Bible says. We can all just agree. And there will be many claiming, "I am the Messiah," and they will deceive many. There won't just be a few. And at some point during this time, early on in these stages, Daniel 9:27 tells us that there will be one person in particular that is the point person. They will be eventually identified as you'll be able to identify them as the Antichrist. This one ruler in Daniel 9:27 says this ruler will make a treaty with the people. Anytime it says the people, he's talking about the nation of Israel. The people for a period of one set of seven, a 7-year window. But after half this time, he will put an end to the sacrifices and the offerings. He's going to appear to let things get back to normal, but it won't last. And when we go to study the Antichrist and all the things that he'll do, we'll look at that in more detail. But understand this, inside this first 3.5 years after the rapture, there's going to be a mindset of great peace. And the whole world will believe that things have settled in. But it can't last very long, because we've got 3 more things that are going to take place before we ever even get to the halfway point. So inside this 3.5-year window, we're going to stabilize the whole earth and everything about it, and everything's going to come together. And trust me, the plans are already in place. The United Nations already has an idea of how we could all get together on one world everything. So this is not an unimaginable thing in this day and age. Verse 3 now of Revelation 6. When the Lamb broke the second seal, I heard the second living being say, "Come." And so again, on God's time, as God gives the orders, the ones that are around his throne, the living beings that were described in Revelation 4 and 5, those living beings will see that the seals are broken, and when the seal is broken, it's time. On God's time schedule. We don't know exactly how long this time of great peace will last. But it's going to be proven to be a false peace because of what happens upon this second seal being opened. Verse 4 then says, another horse appeared, a red one. Its rider was given a mighty sword and the authority to take peace from the earth, and there was war and slaughter everywhere. So let's understand what we can understand here. The white horse is indicative of peace and prosperity. All right? The red horse is indicative of war, bloodshed. And so they are polar opposites, if you will. And this rider is given a mighty sword. The word here for this that you could translate back to the Greek was the sword that people used in hand-to-hand combat when they went to war. The strong, powerful sword that you would use if you were going to do up close and personal battle and try to put someone else to death. He's given a sword and he's given authority to take peace from the earth. So that is quite literally an easy explanation as to what the first horse was all about. The first horse was this force or this idea or this concept of world peace, and then upon the unleashing of the second horse will be the removal of that peace. He has been given authority by God to take peace from the earth. And so the world will devolve, for those people who think that we evolve as a species. This world will devolve right back to normal, where we used to couldn't get along, and where we've always been willing to fight and kill each other. Well, that human instinct, that human nature will be unleashed again, because let's be real. It would have to be a God thing for there to ever truly be any peace on the earth anyway, right? And so even though it's a temporary thing and it's a fleeting thing and it is a false peace that mankind will not credit God for, they'll take credit for it themselves. Now we just default back to our standard setting of hatred, animosity, killing, and wars. And it really doesn't take us very long to get there. As God releases the second horse, the power to remove peace from the earth, and here's what we get in the parallel passage from Jesus' description, the words of Jesus in Matthew 24, verses 6 and the first part of verse 7. Jesus says, "And you will hear of wars and threats of wars." Hey, listen, you guys, we've heard that all of our lives, right? Wars and rumors of wars. And yes, everything Jesus is talking about will be happening during the tribulation. But there are always precursors that give us indications of it in this lifetime. And so we have seen promises of peace that couldn't really be counted on, right? The war to end all wars didn't end all wars. So there's always been this idea that mankind can negotiate and somehow strong-arm their way to peace with one another, and that we would all finally live in harmony together. That's not true. Secondly, there's always been wars and rumors of wars, and so it will still be the same. It'll just be a stark reality for them to go from the idea of peace to the idea of war. Wars and rumors of wars, and Jesus says during this time, yes, these things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. In fact, there's reason to think that once this false peace is broken, once the second horse is released or the second seal is unleashed, there's reason to think that wars and killing will go on for the remainder of this time, the remainder of the 7 years, because there's an awful lot of detail that we'll look at later that is prophesied in the Old Testament about the fighting that the Antichrist eventually ends up being involved with. So this idea of wars and rumors of wars will not just be a temporary thing. Once it starts, it'll ride out all the way through. Verse 7 of Matthew 24 begins like this. Jesus says, nation will go to war against nation and kingdom against kingdom. It will not just be geographic wars. I don't necessarily believe that it'll just be geographic. It'll be ideologies that go to war with each other, different kingdoms, different belief systems. It won't just necessarily be for territory and geography. It won't just be based on national dividing lines, like a nation versus another nation. Yes, that'll be true, but kingdom against kingdom. It may be that ideologies within each own, it may be that the arguments among themselves, the civil wars among their own nations will break out. There will not be any corner of the earth that is protected or safe during this time. When it turns loose, it will turn loose. Revelation 6:4 said there will be war and slaughter everywhere. It won't just be some skirmishes. It won't just be some war here and there. It will be worldwide, and it will grow in intensity, and it will not back off. And that's why you can see what happens in the third seal, Revelation 6:5. When the Lamb broke the third seal, I heard the third living being say, come. I looked up and saw a black horse, and its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. So instead of having a weapon of some sort, he is holding scales in his hand. And that's a reminder that the black horse always signifies famine. You can go back to the book of Lamentation, chapter 5, and see that black is the color of famine. And so the scales indicate that there will not be enough to go around. Even with the true Christians having been raptured out, there still won't be enough to go around once the world falls into this constant war and bloodshed and slaughter, literally just killing one another, not even in armed conflicts, not even in scheduled wars, but there will just be random killings and hatred and animosity that shows up everywhere among mankind. And therefore, the world will end up short-handed when it comes to its supplies. Revelation 6:6 says, and I heard a voice from among the four living beings say. So the first living being, or one of the living beings always is the one that says, come, right? But now, even after that black horse has been commanded to come forth, there is now an additional voice that comes from back there in the midst of the throne. And I believe that voice is the voice of the one who's on the throne, God himself. A reminder that he is the one sending this judgment upon the earth. And this voice then cries out, a loaf of wheat bread or 3 loaves of barley will cost a day's pay. And don't waste the olive oil and wine. God has used famine before to pronounce his judgment. Throughout the Old Testament, we have that recorded for us. And he will do it again. And here's what we need to know. You will have to work all day if you are not raptured out of here. Those that are still here upon the earth will have to work all day to be paid, not in actual money, but to be able to earn enough wheat to feed yourself. And as I understand it, the amount is only for those with a very moderate appetite. You'll work all day just to receive enough sustenance to get through the next day. And if you have to provide for other members of your family who can't work, you'll have to choose then instead to take a lesser version of that wheat, which will instead be barley, which is what they fed the animals. You'll have to sign up for animal feed in order to spread it among members of your family who might not be able to work. And God reminds them that the olive oil and the wine that was necessary for cooking and necessary for the purification of water, those food staples will be absolutely precious. They will be worth their weight in gold. Don't waste those essentials. The only way you'll be able to prepare that food or be able to hydrate yourself safely and effectively will be to protect those precious, precious commodities. And God, in His grace and mercy, even as He rains down judgment upon this earth, has seen fit to remind them and to tell them in advance what it's going to be like. What it's going to be like. And then following on the heels of famine, which again, famine is easily understood in the era of great fighting and warring and bloodshed, when people are being killed and people are using the fields that would normally grow crops to have battles, naturally famine occurs. And then on top of that, as we get toward the end of this first half, okay, I believe the worldwide peace will be a significant portion of that first half. But then the wars that start up, it won't take long for the wars to lead to famine. And it won't take long for famine to lead to pestilence and disease and death in a variety of ways, as we read in verses 7 and 8. Revelation 6, verses 7 and 8. When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the fourth living being say, "Come." I looked up and saw a horse whose color was pale green. Its rider was named Death, and his companion was the grave. Those two were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword and famine and disease and wild animals. So we reach a key stretch here where the worldwide peace has been eliminated. It has been replaced with constant war that they can't seem to stop. They can't quit fighting. It has led to a worldwide famine whereby the food has to be rationed. And on the backside of all of this, now comes the horse whose color was a pale green. It is the color of death. It is the color of death. Its rider was named Death. And for those who might wish and hope and want to believe that the end of this physical life is the end of it all, they would say, okay, fine, we die. But a very clear distinction is made, is that death is riding with someone. And the one riding with death is called Hades, or the grave. And that is to say, the soul will enter into eternity. Physical death, yes. End of your earthly existence, yes. But along with that will come the eternity whereby your soul will exist forever. And so you cannot escape eternity. That is the reminder of the pale horse of death. is that death doesn't just come and leave you dead. Death comes, and then the grave is like the hearse that comes along behind you, picks you up, and your soul is headed to eternity. And that is God's reminder to us that the end of it here on earth is not the end of it. And that preparation should be made, must be made, for the fact that death comes for all of us, except those few who might be alive when the Lord comes back to rapture us home. But there is a companion. And you don't just die physically, but you then move into eternal existence, and you cannot escape the choice that you made here on this earth. And that's why you and I, that's why you, anybody, needs to be ready to go when Jesus calls, so that we don't live through all of this. But we've seen versions of this. We see natural disasters. We see starvation, right? We see these things. We see war. We see starvation. We see devastation in this earth. Not on this scale, but we see it. It's a reminder to us that God will judge someday. And the death and the grave were given permission. They were given authority to wipe out 25% of the earth's population at one time. Now, how many days or months or weeks this might occur across, I'm not sure. But at some point throughout this period of time where we move from world peace, which is false, to war, to starvation, to now any number of ways to die. All right? God's going to start unleashing the variety of ways to die. When it's all said and done, 25% of the earth's population will be wiped out. They will have met their end. Now, what's 25% of the world's population right now? Well, I know you probably already know this, but I'll do the math for you anyway. There's currently 7.75 billion people on the planet. 7.75 billion. It's been estimated that by the year 2040, we could be at 9 billion. The population explosion is real. At the year 2000, we were at about 6 billion. So in 20 years, we have gained almost 2 billion people on the planet. But at 7.75 billion, and I'm not even going to factor in how many Christians get called home at the rapture, okay? But at 7.75 billion, 25% of that is almost 2 billion. That's with a B. 1.94 billion, based on the current population. 1.94 billion is 6 times the current population of the United States. To put it in another way, the current world population, the United States only has 4.25% of the whole world population. Now, we like to think of ourselves as a big country, and we are. But the United States only possesses 4.25% of all the world's population right now. There's a lot more people out there than we realize. Our minds can't comprehend it. But in one small window of time, the decree of God says that 25% of the people left on the earth at that time, and it could be anywhere, let's say somewhere in the range of 2 billion people, they will meet their end. They will meet their end. And they will meet their end either by sword, okay? There'll be war that brings them to their death, famine, disease. The word is also used pestilence over and over again. Pestilence can often describe diseases, and I won't even get into that question right now. We certainly know that there's reason to be concerned about what biological or chemical weapons or biological or chemical warfare could do right now. There are weapons of mass destruction that could be sent out and create diseases at any time, and even wild animals. In a world that is starving to death, in a world that is war-torn and devastated, in a world that is impacted by earthquakes and all sorts of instability in the earth's surface and atmosphere, there's every reason to believe that the sanitation will be so terrible that wild animals, yes, even rats, could spread disease and devastation as they have done many times before in the history of mankind. And so, yes, wild animals will be used by God to bring people to their end. Matthew 24, verse 7, the rest of verse 7 and verse 8. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But, verse 8, all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. This is only the beginning. This is only the first 4 seals. There are 17 more judgments left to go. So some things for us to consider as we close. Understand that peace will be worshiped. People will chase peace and safety. Whatever they think they can get out of this world, they just want to be comforted by things of this world. And God will allow it for a time, and people will be deluded. There will be extreme bloodshed that follows because mankind's true colors will eventually shine through. And then there will be famine, disease, and destruction of every kind as God allows 1/4 of the earth's population to be wiped out and to meet their end at one time. Oh, we have seen deadly events and deadly things throughout our lifetime, but they are simply precursors. They are simply indications of what God's judgment might truly be. He has promised that it will be entirely detailed in the vision that he gave to John and that John wrote down and preserved for us. And thank God he did. Father, we thank you for the truth of your word. We thank you that your word gives us enough information that we can know that the absolute right thing to do with our lives is to follow in complete dependence upon Jesus Christ for salvation, for forgiveness of sin, and Father, that we should set aside any and everything necessary in order to walk in obedience to him. Because your eventual judgment is just as sure as anything that we could ever believe in. We thank you for giving it to us, that we might know, that we might warn the world around us if they are willing to listen, in Jesus' name.